Welcome to Fight News Now Extra. It's John Pollock here alongside John Ramdeen, taking you into the weekend. An interesting match that was announced this past week by Halleck Gracie. Chael Sonnen returning to Metamoris. This time he is going to be taking on Renato Babalu Sobral, two men that have fought in mixed martial arts on two past occasions, now going into the grappling arena of sorts. What are your thoughts on this in terms of Metamoris? They clearly looking for name value for these events and presenting something a bit different than straight mixed martial arts. And in the case of Chael Sonnen, someone that through a loophole they can use, even though he cannot compete in MMA at the moment.
Yeah, I love Metamoris, and I think as grappling fans, jiu-jitsu fans, and practitioners of the sport, we want this to continue. We're hoping that this keeps going on. There's word on the street, so to speak, that it's a tumultuous time for Metamoris. It's an expensive endeavor, sure. But as long as they have shows, I think there's going to be an audience. And to have the crossover from mixed martial arts into grappling makes perfect sense. The last show, I think, was Chael Sonnen versus Andre Galvao. Galvao, one of the best grapplers in the world. But I like this matchup, and I think they need to have more of this. I mean, just the idea of Ronda Rousey or Cyborg involved in grappling matches. We heard Gabby Garcia challenge Ronda Rousey, and I would love to see it. Of course, there's such a weight discrepancy. I don't know if that match would ever make sense, but right now is a good time for grappling, and I think Metamoris gets to shine a spotlight on it.
This is obviously going to heat up discussion on Chael Sonnen. He's doing a lot of work right now with ESPN. Where do you ultimately see Chael Sonnen ending up? Is it back with the UFC? I mean, he's got a pretty great position right now at ESPN. I mean, he was floating out those rumors about going to professional wrestling, keeping his options open at this point. But what do you see for Chael Sonnen, and specifically with the UFC down the road?
Yeah, I would not be surprised if Chael Sonnen found his way back to the organization. I mean, if his suspension is up and he's able to compete, he's a competitor, and the UFC knows they need stars, and this guy is clearly a star. People want to see Chael Sonnen compete. The problem is, there is a divide because, Chael Sonnen had his opportunities. He's faced some of the best guys, and he always kind of comes up short, but he always creates interest, and I think if you give Chael Sonnen the right matchups, that he can sell fights, and I think people want to tune in to see him. But on the broadcast side, I mean, he's good to go. People want to hear what Chael Sonnen has to say. He's an interesting character, and I think he always adds to any broadcast he's a part of. So Chael Sonnen is one of these guys that really has built a career inside of the octagon that will allow him to have a future outside of it. And I think, it's great to see, because not everybody that helped pioneer mixed martial arts will have those luxuries.
He's an interesting one because he was given his 2-year suspension, and the UFC is certainly going to honor that when it's given out by a commission such as Nevada. And we look at the UFC's plan right now to combat performance-enhancing drugs, saying that they will follow the WADA code of a 2-year suspension for a first-time offender. They would even support a 4-year ban, which WADA might be introducing. So the UFC is on board with this. You also have to get all these commissions to agree to this. And moreover, if you are a Bellator, for instance, are you getting behind this idea that, wait a minute, if one of our top stars fails, we don't want him going away for 4 years? Also, boxing promotions have to get on board with this. I don't doubt that they would want, a major level boxer who tests positive for drostanolone to suddenly be gone for 4 years. When you break down the logistics of this, they sound near impossible to me.
It's true, but at the same time, as promoters, especially in North America, they see that what the UFC is doing. Okay, they have a responsibility. They feel they have a responsibility to clean up the sport. So there's going to be shockwaves. And for Bellator and RFA and Titan and all these smaller promotions, they have to realize that, okay, this is going to trickle down. So we have to be ready. We have to start introducing these to our athletes as well, because quite frankly, a lot of the athletes that compete in Bellator, once their contract is up, we've seen a lot of them go over to the UFC because, how many MMA fighters say, oh, the goal is to be a Bellator fighter. The goal is to be an athlete in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. So, and this is an issue that crosses different organizations. It's the entire sport. It's not just promotion by promotion. So I'm sure those conversations are already being had, as well as managers, trainers, teammates. They know the sport's going to be cleaned up. And I think that when the conversation happens between an athlete and their manager, well, the goal is to get to the UFC. We can't do the things that we were doing before. we have to get ourselves ready to fight in the big show.
I think that these next couple of months are going to be as interesting as any in recent memory in terms of how attractive the UFC is to an outside fighter. Certainly, that's always been the goal. You get to the UFC, at least it has been for the past decade. But you look at things like the Reebok deal being introduced and how much that's going to scare off somebody that believes on the outside, I can make so much more. I mean, let's throw out the name of a Brock Lesnar who was able to maneuver a great deal with the WWE and get his sponsors included, which no other wrestler is going to get. He comes into the WWE, there's now this restriction where, no, you are not going to be bringing in outside sponsors. You are sponsored by Reebok, and you're going to get a cut of this. If you're a fighter that maybe is not on the ascent of your career, but you have established a huge name for yourself, it's restrictive in the UFC under these new conditions, is the way it appears now.
Yeah, and you also look, again, we were having this conversation about Cyborg and this fight with Charmaine Tweet. Cyborg made $90,000, for that fight. So I can see where it would be attractive for her to stay in that organization. She has her own sponsors. She can make a lot of money by staying there, or you go to the UFC, you run the risk of getting tested nonstop, as well as having to conform to their sponsorship policy. So it just comes down to a person-by-person basis. And do you have the drawing power? Do you believe that you are the type of fighter that will be able to get to the top of that mountain? Like, look at Eddie Alvarez weighing the option between Bellator and the UFC. Sure, he takes a gamble. I believe that I can come to the UFC, become the lightweight champion. Instead, he comes to the UFC, loses his first fight against Donald Cerrone, and now he's got this fight with Gilbert Melendez. It's another fight that he could lose. Of course, he could win this fight, but what happens if Eddie Alvarez loses 3 fights in a row?
Yeah, it's really wait and see until these fighters get those first wave of Reebok contract or payoffs from the deal. But once a few of those come in and you're a fighter of a level of a Uriah Faber, somebody of that level, and your contract comes due, I think Bellator looks way more attractive with this Reebok deal and what it could potentially mean for some of these fighters, especially when you're so contingent on where you are in your rankings. Interesting stuff coming up in the next couple of months on the business end of mixed martial arts. For John Randy and I'm John Pollock. More Fight News Now extras coming up. Stay tuned.